On this channel, when two teenagers go missing, you're probably right to fear the worst. And in this disturbing case from Canada, when the authorities found their burned out car close to a corpse, you would totally think that something awful just happened to them. But pretty soon, the authorities realized that these missing teenagers were not at all how they'd first appeared. And an entire country would eventually get involved with their twisted road trip. So, let's investigate the truth. Kam McLeod, age 19, and Bryer Schmegelsky, age 18, were two apparently normal teenage boys living in Port Alberni in British Columbia, Canada. While it seems like a pretty place to live, I get the impression that they badly wanted to get out and explore the rest of the world. So on July 12th, 2019, just after they'd ended their jobs at Walmart, they told friends and family that they were taking a trip further north to find work in Yukon. Kam and Bryer had been close friends since high school. Kam's dad, Keith McLeod, called his son a kind, considerate, caring young man who has always been concerned about other people's feelings. While Bryer's dad said,
he was very introverted, and he was very heavy into video games. They never got in trouble with the law. They never got into fights. You know, they were just hanging out and having a good time.
So everyone was really disturbed and very concerned for their safety when on July 19th, authorities discovered their burned out truck on Highway 37 in British Columbia. Even worse, a body was found nearby and it was burned up too. Creepy. Kam and Bryer were both declared missing and a search began. People were especially scared for them because the bodies of a young couple had been discovered in the Canadian wilderness just a few days before. Someone had executed them both with an SKS semi-automatic rifle, and the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, believed that these two cases might be linked. They were half right about that. The cases were linked, but things were really not at all how they first seemed. The deceased couple had been identified as China Noel Deese of North Carolina and her bae, Lucas Robertson Fowler. They had met in Croatia, and both of them really loved to travel. They'd been all over the world together, and they seemed to genuinely love each other's company, even at the gas station. They were traveling together across Canada in that blue van, and sadly, this is the last known footage of either of them. They look really sweet, don't they? But their van had broken down, and Charles Ray, another tourist, had driven past and offered to help with their van. He said that they'd been in good spirits and hadn't needed his help. But by the time he came back to check on them, the area was locked down by the police. Another witness who drove by said that they'd seen the couple in a heated argument with another man. The van's back window was smashed and the side door was open. China and Lucas were found face down in a nearby ditch. But what raised major red flags and began to connect the dots for investigators had been the randomly burned body discovered near Kam and Bryer's destroyed car. This was identified as Leonard Dick. He was a professor of botany at the University of British Columbia. By all accounts, he was a really cool guy. He was spending a few weeks traveling, doing research, and chilling out. It's unlikely he ever expected it to all end the way that it did. His wife had identified him in a photo fit released by the police. The RCMP soon correlated that the bullets used in both of these tragic cases were the same. And what really pulled it all together was the footage of Bryer and Kam buying those exact same weapons perfectly legally right after they left their hometown. Bryer and Kam were spotted on CCTV footage alive and well on July 21st, and they were driving Leonard Dick's stolen Toyota. Both the weapons and the stolen car added up to something awful.
The RCMP are now considering Kam McLeod and Bryer Schmegelsky as suspects.
By July 24th, the RCMP knew they were hunting two really dangerous predators and issued warrants for their arrest. People were warned not to approach them. Oh, and apparently they hadn't just ended those 3 lives. They'd also hurt their victims a great deal before finishing the job. So these guys were seriously sick and dangerous. And even worse, they could be literally anywhere. An enormous manhunt began, but Canada, especially when you leave the cities, is a pretty huge place. They had lots of wilderness to hide out in. Even so, the RCMP were a little shocked by how effectively they'd escaped the search. Bryer's father still couldn't quite believe what his son was doing.
The fact is, nobody knows what happened out there.
We know that this is one of the largest manhunts in Canadian history on 2 little boys.
But they were definitely very far from innocent, and they should be old enough to know that what they were doing was totally wrong. Things would only get scarier from now on. On July 17th, one man had a totally terrifying encounter with Kam and Bryer. After driving for 15 hours, Kenneth Albertson was napping at the side of the road in the back of his vehicle. Then he noticed a very slow-moving truck beginning to pass by him.
And then the passenger door on the truck opened, and someone stepped out holding a long gun, and that got my attention. He closed the door, and at that point, he started what I would call stalking behavior. Slightly crouched, walking as if he's trying to walk quietly, holding his gun in what I would call a low ready position.
The van was also coming back to block him in. Thankfully, Kenneth was able to get in the front of his car, start it, and speed off just in time. He didn't even bother to get dressed. Kenneth tried to get a look at the driver of the truck as he went past, but the man had his face covered. And when Kenneth realized just a couple of days later who it must have been, he was totally freaked out. I mean, who wouldn't be, right? He told the police about it on July 22nd. By now, the whole of Canada was afraid that the pair would show up somewhere close to their front door. Nobody knew how far they'd go or exactly what else they were capable of. You can see here just how wide their road trip from hell really was. But the 3 victims they'd already hurt suggested the sooner they were found, the better. Lots of sightings were reported across the country, but none of them came to anything until July 22nd, when they finally had a major breakthrough. And that happened a very long way from where this all started. Fox Lake is a tiny community in Alberta, almost 2,500 miles from Port Alberni. But it was here that the locals found an important clue that changed the whole search. Bill Beardy and his wife Tamara had noticed a large fire in the woods near their home in Fox Lake. Naturally, they went to investigate. What they found was a burned out car on its roof, still smoking. And even stranger, it was surrounded by unused weapon shells. It turned out that this was Leonard Dick's stolen Toyota. Naturally, this prompted a huge search in the area. The army and the police arrived in serious force and brought dogs, infrared equipment, and drones to scour the area for any sign of Bryer and Kam. Now, they started the search much further away from Fox Lake than you might think, but authorities felt that this would stop the pair from fleeing outside the Canadian border.
Given that there is a lead time of almost 2 days at that point, where do you start looking was the question. And there are multiple access points that could take you out of that area.
The search team started working their way inwards, trying to narrow it down. This meant that a lot of resources were deployed at York Landing. But it was a super scary time for the locals at Fox Creek. Billy's wife, Tamara Beardy, said,
being scared and nervous and I didn't even want to let my kids play outside.
Bill Beardy knew the area extremely well. He'd lived in Fox Lake since before it had electricity or running water. So he was helping the RCMP to navigate the dangerous rivers and was out with the patrols almost all of the time. There were a lot of ravines that were hard to reach, and the plant life was really thick. They could still be anywhere, but eventually a backpack was found. It was surprisingly near to the burned out Toyota truck, but it had been missed during the last search. The woods are pretty dark and deep, you know? Anyway, the backpack gave searchers a real steer in the right direction. This led them to a boat stranded on the river. Later, it turned out they'd always planned to escape by boat to another country and hide out forever. So that's actually one likely reason why they creeped on poor Kenneth in his truck. He was towing a small motorboat, and they were probably trying to steal it. But this boat, which was almost certainly theirs, got stuck in the strong current. They now had no way out of that river. So the theory went that they must be somewhere really close. Close being kinda a loose term, given how huge the area still was. So they gave the river another sweep. Once again, Billy Bird was navigating the dangerous waters with the RCMP. They were passing some deep ravines when they all noticed a huge black bird fly up into the sky. After a moment of everyone staring at it, Billy strongly recommended that the cops should check it out. You see, the scary black bird was a raven. Ravens have been long considered to be birds of ill omen, death, and evil in general, in part because of the negative symbolism of their all-black plumage and the eating of carrion. That seems a little harsh considering they're just doing bird things, but whatever. In this case, the sighting of a raven meant that something had died nearby, and Billy was pretty convinced he knew what or who it could be. So it might not surprise you that when authorities landed near where the Raven had flown away, they made a gruesome discovery.
And we spun around, and sure enough, as soon as we got to shore, then we seen that one guy there for sure. We didn't even see the other guy. Until actually we got off the shore and walked up a bit, and that's when we seen they were both there.
Kam had turned his weapon on Bryer before using it on himself, but then they remained outside for a while, so the authorities still aren't exactly sure when they ended their lives.
It's really windy, so having that smell of death in here was really, like, it probably would have traumatized me more.
Billy spent 13 hours bringing people there to check that scene, but they might not have found it at all until he pointed out that helpful Raven. The RCMP released an announcement that the two bodies were in fact the two fugitives. The hunt was finally over. After a thorough forensic search of this grisly scene, the RCMP brought them home. It turned out that after surviving for days out in the wilderness, Kam and Bryer had eventually realized that there was no way out. They left 6 messages and their wills on videos on their phones, saying that they felt cornered and they wished to be cremated. They took responsibility for every victim, but didn't sound particularly sorry. Afterwards, Kevin Hackett from the RCMP stated that they were cold, they were remorseless, and matter of fact. Of course, the people who'd known them in their hometown couldn't believe any of it, although Bryer had been freaking some of his classmates out for a while.
I think he just mentioned things like that made the kids feel uncomfortable, like odd comments while they were playing their video games and stuff. I'm like, could you imagine if this was real? And he got excited about it and stuff, so. But I mean, lots of kids do that. They don't turn out to be suspected murderers, so.
Bryer also liked to pretend to be from Russia for some reason, and admired the Russian president, and a very controversial American president too. On top of that, he had a very unhealthy fascination with World War II memorabilia, like, not the winning side there, all I'm saying. Although his dad is kind of preferred to blame computer games and YouTube for his issues. Bryce's grandmother also claimed that before leaving, he had been rejected by a girl. But whatever the real reason or trigger, the RCMP later revealed that Kam and Bryer were definitely planning to continue their spree. The footage released from those last recordings on their phones made that sick fact totally clear. Still, the only slightly impressive thing about them is just how far they were able to get with an entire country looking for them. Even with the Canadian Army and RCMP involved, the case was only finally closed thanks to a local man's nature knowledge. Speaking of Bill Beardy, that October he was elected chief of Fox Lake and given many honors by the Fox Lake Cree Nation for his bravery and hard work, though he's still a little PO'd about the lack of protection the RCMP offered him. A bulletproof vest would have been a nice gesture, you know? But let's not forget all those lives Kam and Bryer ended along the way. At the tribute to the victims, Lucas Fowler's father said,
"We're so happy that Lucas and China found each other and had such a great time traveling together, meeting new friends, and just milking every last drop of fun out of life.
Right until the end.
He and China live on in our heart. We always love him."
The family of Leonard Dick said, "We are truly heartbroken by the sudden and tragic loss of Len. He was a loving husband and father. His death has created unthinkable grief, and we are struggling to understand what has happened." At least the two guys who thought this awful road trip would be their big adventure can't hurt anybody else now. Thanks to Billy Beardy and a very hungry Raven, we do know that much for sure. So, although this case is very tragic, at least there was some closure for the families they affected. So what do you think of this case? What do you think set them off trying to hurt so many people? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below.